Welcome to the Season 22 Schedule Release Show. Alongside Mike St. Green, I am Cameron Irvine, and welcome into the new and improved SFL headquarters, and welcome back to Mike St. Green. Glad you're not on the road this week, so you can join us for some schedule release action and keep the tradition alive. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, doing great, Cameron. As you just mentioned, man, keeping the tradition alive. I think this is, 6 seasons running, and it's great to be back again to, this is one of the most anticipated off-season events that we have here in the SFL, and it's good to be back for the 6th season running, and, couldn't be a better time to be a part of the SFL.
We've refreshed our look, and we're throwing it back, to a look that we had back in summer 2020 of COVID with, I would call it the light themed, as here in our headquarters. We have our new SFL light here on the wall, and we are ready to get this season underway. I can't express to you, Mike, the level of optimism I have going into season 22. There may be less weaker teams on your schedule this season as the league contracted down to 25, split the teams into five-team conferences and or divisions rather, and it gives us a new schedule format as well that we'll be going over here in a moment. But yeah, it's exciting stuff. We got through our first season on the new game. And now that we've kind of ironed out some of the kinks, Mike, I think we're poised for a terrific season 22.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to a great season 22, Cam. But before we go too far ahead into the future, I just want to give a quick congratulatory, to the Florida Storm on picking up the first championship under the new format. But their fourth championship total, and Baltimore, hats off to them as well. Between those two franchises, Cam, 9 total championships out of the 21 championships that have been celebrated by this league. But going forward, I mean, it's going to be anybody's ball game, especially with the contracted schedules now. The best are going to be meeting the best more often in this league. But what the past also shows you from the APF up into 2K4 is that if you have a great organization, you're basically going to be consistently winning in this league. Great organization, great team, keeping things moving forward, and that's what Florida and Baltimore epitomized on both formats.
And we will have a championship rematch on the schedule. Florida will play Baltimore somewhere on this schedule, and we will find out where that is momentarily. Let's start with the schedule format adjustments. So this season with 25 teams, had to shake things up just a little bit. But each team still plays 12 regular season games, 6 on the road and 6 at home. Each team plays a divisional opponent once. That's 4 games of your schedule. And here's the wrinkle. You play 2 teams from each other division, 1 home and 1 away. So you'll play 2 of the 5 teams from all of the divisions that are not your own. The matchups were selected in an effort to get every team's strength of schedule as equal as possible. And the order of matchups were selected at random. Thank you, Google. So if you're not a fan of how your schedule was ironed out, you can actually blame a robot this time and not totally 100% on me. So that's always good, Mike. It gets a little tiring after a while carrying the load, but it's okay. We'll rely on technology some. Playoff adjustments. All 5 division winners will clinch playoff spots regardless of overall record. Remember, last season, Mike, there was that weirdness with the North and all that other stuff. We're back to, regardless, division winners clinching playoff spots. And, hey, Mike, Minnesota clinched a playoff spot at 4-8, and they pushed Arizona to the brink in the wild card round. It was one of the best games of the whole season. So, you never know. Sometimes wins and losses can be thrown out once you get to the postseason.
Well, one thing I do know, as you just mentioned, Arizona, Eddie's going to complain about his schedule being too tough, no matter who put the schedule together. We know he's going to have the toughest schedule in the league, according to him. But as you said, man, any given sim day, as we know that I originated that, Cam. I've been hearing people throw that around since I hadn't been around, and you've been letting them get away with it.
Oh, man, I know. Well, hey, it makes me upset every time, but you gotta You gotta pick your battles around here.
But any given Sunday, as you mentioned, with Minnesota and Arizona, anybody in this league could step up and make statement that, hey, we're here to play, and that's what we're looking forward to here in season 21. Who's going to step up and maybe a below 500 record last season and step up and make a name for themselves this season in season 22.
To answer Mark Lopez's question, yes, the wins and loss record from season 21 were used to calculate that strength of schedule for everyone. All right, so without further ado, Mike, we're ready for opening week. We announced earlier, before we get to the full slate, we announced earlier today on our Discord server that Charleston would be at Florida to kick off the season Friday, January 12th. So Charleston gets the draw of the defending champs. We began season 21 in Florida. We'll be back there again. And look, a kind of an old face in division, a division rival of Florida. And look, Charleston was not only a playoff team, but won a playoff game last season, upsetting Seattle. This should be a great matchup.
Yeah, it should be a great matchup and a big challenge for Charleston coming out of the gate, facing the defending champions, playoff team, as you mentioned, in their own right. Can they continue the momentum that they had last season and coming in and trying to get a big upset against Florida in the opening game of the season?
All right, here is week number 1's opening schedule. Everyone's first game except for one team who unfortunately has to take a week 1 bye, because that's what happens when you have an odd number of teams. That unlucky team is Minnesota. Minnesota gets the week 1 bye. Now, depending upon how you look at it, you also get an extra week to prepare for the season in this shortened offseason, so that could be used to Minnesota's advantage as well. And before I put that week 1 schedule up, Chad Rowland saying that you're looking old. Would you like to respond to that, Mike?
I have something for Chad when his schedule comes out. I'll just leave it to that. I'll leave your punishment for later, Chad.
Well, there we go. All right, week 1 is as follows. On Friday night, Charleston takes on Florida, and then we have more football, a doubleheader late night. Atlanta, led by new head coach Chris Porter, plays their first game, and they go to Indianapolis to take on the Ramblers, and then a divisional matchup out in the Pacific, Portland and Vancouver. Portland had Vancouver's number last season, and the Legion will be looking to change that. That kickoff is at 10:30. Then on Saturday, the headline game at 6:30, Louisiana at DC. The Revolution have been on the cusp of the playoffs 2 consecutive seasons, 7-5 one time, 6-6 another, but just haven't been able to crack the playoffs. This is an early chance to improve their strength of victory in that one. Sunday, January 14th is headlined by Seattle at Los Angeles. The Lycans showed so much promise this past season. Sully Richardson so much improved. LA won big games like that upset win over Arizona, and they will host division rival Seattle in week number 1. And then Monday night, the rematch of quite possibly the best game of the season. Fort Worth and Alamo City. We get it week 1 in San Antonio, and we'll see what those two teams have. There's a host of other games: Queen City, Baltimore, San Diego, Houston, Mexico City, Motor City on Saturday, Arizona, Canton, Carolina, Tulsa, Jacksonville, Denver on Sunday. What do you want to dive into, Mike?
Cam, no disrespect to any other team in this league, but without a doubt, the Monday night spectacular matchup, it takes precedent over any other matchup in this opening week. Undefeated regular season for Fort Worth. Alamo City, the only team to beat them, I want to say, in the regular season was Fort Worth. So great matchup in South Division to start off the season, and who's going to get the upper hand in that division early on in this upcoming season.
Looking forward to that Arizona and Canton game on Sunday. Canton has a lot to prove as Porter went over to Atlanta, and they're coming off of an impressive season. They blanked Vancouver in the playoffs 40-0, made the quarterfinals. So they're a team to watch. And then, of course, Arizona trying to bounce back and start another championship run, as Mr. Gage often does. So that's a look at week 1. All right, now let's move on to the Monday night spectacular schedule for season 22. And that looks like this. Fort Worth, Alamo City, week 1. Seattle at Baltimore, week 2. Ty Patak, the offensive rookie of the year, heading to Baltimore to take on the Vultures. Believe that'll be their first meeting in terms of Patak versus the dynasty that is Baltimore. Then in week 3, Fort Worth goes to Florida, a championship matchup that we didn't get to see. That is week 3, so you've got the regular season's best team from last season and then the postseason's best team from last season in Florida in week 3. Week 4, Louisiana at Mexico City. Mike Daggs versus Gerald Smith, the broadcast partners who have been clamoring to be division rivals for as long as I can remember, now are division rivals in the South, and they will be front and center Monday, February 5th. Then, as announced earlier today, a new tradition, a Monday night doubleheader on the 12th of every Monday the 12th, I should say, in honor of Matt Wilson. Mexico City will get a home game every one of those Monday nights, plus an additional game. Mexico City hosts Jacksonville, and Arizona is at Indy. That is the Streets Are Talking Bowl, as Eddie Gage and Chad Rowland will square it off in week 5. Week 6, DC at Canton. That was a nail-biter last season in division, still a divisional game up in the north. Those are the first 6 weeks. Let's focus on those. Mike, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, that word on the street matchup, that's what I call the show anyway. That's going to be an interesting matchup. What is it, Cam, again? What is it called?
Streets Are Talking.
Oh, okay. Word on the street, what's up, whatever it's called. That's going to be an interesting matchup between those two guys. But and that's great that to honor Matt Wilson, that Jacksonville and Mexico City matchup. That's a fantastic way to honor Matt in that way. That's cool to see. That last one again, week of the season, Fort Worth and Baltimore. That should be a great matchup from the playoffs a season ago. And also what caught my eye here was San Diego and Seattle. At the time of the season that's going to be, that matchup is going to take place. Probably going to have some playoff implications and who's going to have an advantage over the other doing that. Probably by the time we reach that game on March 11th. Both of these teams are in the same division this season, so that should be very interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, you snuck ahead on me, but the rest of the Monday Night Spectacular slate includes Week 7, Baltimore at San Diego, Week 8, Arizona at Alamo City. You mentioned San Diego, Seattle, and then Carolina, Louisiana, D.C. at Tulsa down the stretch. D.C.'s never been to Tulsa. And then Indianapolis at Minnesota is going to be a good one. That's in Week 13. And then Fort Worth and Baltimore. I'm noticing, actually, that I think... Did I miss a game on this graphic? I did. That's Week 9. Arizona is... Oh, no, I got it there. Arizona, Alamo City. No, it's Week 8. Charleston and Carolina. Carolina is at Charleston in week number 8. That is... So the dates are a little bit wonky. I'm just noticing that mistake. My apologies, everyone. We'll get that corrected and then get a new graphic out to you. But Carolina and Charleston also getting a Monday night spectacular matchup. All right, so that is a look at the primetime schedule, and then we also have we've also announced the Week 1 schedule. That means that get your super chats ready, because we are ready to talk about these teams. If a bunch of super chats come in right away, the highest bid gets talked about first, and if it's just one at a time in a trickle, then we'll get to them in the order that they are received. But Mike, I'm super excited for opening week as we wait for the chat to tell us where to go with this show. I was talking to Axel Raven about that Minnesota Week 1 bye. How do you feel about Week 1 buys? We're going to have 3 buys in Week 14 as well, potentially gearing up for the playoffs, or potentially ending your season early. What's your thought on bye weeks and how you want them staggered?
Yeah. Well, as far as for Week 1, as far as Minnesota goes, my initial thought was kind of what you mentioned, is that now that these teams see who they're going to face Week 1 as it stands here, that who we know that are going to play one another. These guys are going to go out and start scouting teams that they they may know a little bit of their tendencies, know a little bit of their personnel that carries over from last season. We're assuming certain players are going to stick with certain teams. As we know, free agency starts here, I believe tomorrow, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll know more about that, who's going where as far as free agency goes. But Minnesota, on the other hand, they're going to have the advantage of sitting back a week and evaluating who they're going to be playing in week 2 for everyone else, but week 1 for them. And I think it's an advantage Minnesota in that case. And I think that's what the position, if I had to be on the bye, I think that's the position I'd rather be in.
Rochelle Colson with the $25 super chat. We're going to go to Los Angeles first to take a look at the Lycans Winter 2024 Season 22 schedule. They start at home with Seattle, as already mentioned, and then back-to-back road games against Arizona and Atlanta. That game against Arizona, a rematch of that big upset that they had last year. They come back home for Minnesota before a week 5 bye, at home for Charleston, and then a pair of road games at Mexico City and Motor City, home for Vancouver and Queen City, then back on the road in back-to-back divisional games in week 11 and week 12, followed by a bye before they welcome Alamo City the last week of the season. 3 division games in the last 5 for this team after a week 1 divisional game against Seattle. Your thoughts on LA, Mike?
Well, LA was kind of the more or less a mystery team last season, Cam. They played well. Like, as you mentioned, Sully Richardson earlier, what a great season that he had. But in my book, they were probably the best team that didn't make the playoffs last season. They played well in so many games, just came up short in some instances. But starting off against Seattle and Los Angeles division, matchup to start the season, they both, I think, going to have something to prove coming into season 22. Los Angeles obviously want to take that next step and make the playoffs. Seattle, they want to continue that success that they had with Type Attack and the great rookie season that he had. So that's going to be an intense matchup to start this season off. And then, man, to close it off in week 14 with Alamo City, that's you can't get much tougher than that. Los Angeles is going to be tested throughout this schedule. And as you mentioned, a couple of division matchups late in that season as well with San Diego and Portland. That Portland-LA matchup is always a great matchup because these teams have always, they're kind of always right around 500, trying to get to that, playoff hurdle, and we'll see what that matchup will bring in week 12.
Yeah, I think for Los Angeles, in the middle of their season, they have kind of an opportunity to catch fire, get hot right before those big divisional games. And look, Mike, the Pacific is wide open this year, really. I mean, there's just so much talent there with the addition of San Diego and Vancouver losing the crown this past season. It's really anybody's out there right now. And with those divisional games coming late, that's key. Also worth noting, LA gets 2 byes before playing playoff teams from last season at home. So the bye weeks fall kind of to their advantage in that sense, because they get some extra time to prepare for some expected pretty good teams. Okay, we're going to go to the next highest super chat that was first. That was Arizona. And we're going to take a look at the Arizona Scorpions season 22 schedule. And it starts on the road at Canton, then home against LA, we talked about. Then week 3 at Charleston, so playoff team versus playoff team there. Then they host Denver in week 4. We all know how that turned out for the Night Wings this past season. Denver will be looking for a little bit of revenge there. The Monday night game against Indy, followed by a bye before Florida. So they're another key bye there for the Scorpions. But check this out, Mike. Florida, Baltimore, Alamo City, back-to-back-to-back, weeks 7 through 9. Got to be one of the most brutal stretches maybe ever, but they do get 2 of them at home. And then Arizona gets one of those week 14 byes. So potentially a bonus week before they get in the playoffs. And look, if they don't get in the wild card round, they could be sitting at home for 2 weeks straight, well rested for that quarterfinal game. They cap off the season at home against your Houston Headhunters. What do you think of Arizona?
Well, Cam, Eddie may be right this season. This is a very, very tough schedule. Playoff team Canton, playoff team Charleston. I'm looking at week 5. That's probably the weakest game on their schedule. Will Indiana have a win by that time, Cam. We'll see by the time that schedule comes out. But champion Florida, as Baltimore in the championship game, Alamo City's there, and then they can't close out the season with a tougher matchup than facing Houston in Week 13.
I want to clarify that I'm laughing at Mike St. Green and Chad Rowland's banter, not at Indianapolis being potentially poor. That's just rude, and that's all St. Green. But I do.
Well, Indianapolis. That's just for Chad. No offense to anybody else.
I do love the silliness. But yeah, I mean Arizona. At least they get a bye before that deep stretch. But that's a tough go. And of course, anytime Baltimore's on their schedule, they're going to have that circled on their calendar. A couple of tough road games. Of course, Portland played Arizona on a Monday night this past season. That was the famous redo game because of the extra point disaster, and Portland just didn't really show up for that contest. So they're going to be hoping for some revenge there as well. All right, so that's a look at Arizona. And I'm checking up on the chats here. It looks like the next team we're going to get to, that's going to be Seattle. The Seattle Nemesis coming up next on the Season 22 schedule release show. Their schedule starts with 2 games on the road. LA and Baltimore, as already mentioned. Then a Week 3 bye. So their home opener is Week 4 against Tulsa, followed by Alamo City, Louisiana, Charleston. Road game at Minnesota, so 3 out of 4 on the road. They are, in fact, 5 out of their first 7 on the road, but they have a 3-game homestand down the stretch. D.C., San Diego, Jacksonville, followed by a bye, and then 2 divisional games to cap it off. Week 13 at Vancouver, expected to be a huge game, and then home against Portland. In Week 14, the 2 Monday night games against Baltimore and San Diego, Weeks 2 and 10. Your thoughts on Seattle?
Well, Cam, going into last season, this was the team I really were looking forward to seeing play the most because of the pick of the number 1 overall pick, Type Attack, and they really did not disappoint. And going into this season, I think I'm most anxious to see them as well, because I want to see if they can follow up on the success that they had last season. And it's going to be tough sledding coming out of the gate. We already talked about the LA matchup, but to follow that up with Baltimore. And they did get a bye week to kind of regroup as to maybe how the season may have started the first couple of games, and then they come back with Tulsa and then Alamo City, Louisiana, and Charleston. I mean that's a tough stretch right there to open up the season, the first 7 weeks, and they kind of finish the second half. It gets a little lighter. And we're talking about, as far as historically what we've seen in this league, Jacksonville, they've been struggling over the past couple of seasons. Portland, of course, they've never made the playoffs to close the season there. And a big matchup is probably going to determine the division in Week 13, possibly with Vancouver. That's what stands out to me with the schedule with Seattle.
Yeah, 5 of their last 7 opponents have made the playoffs last season, but only one of them has ever won a championship. So, in some ways, a very difficult schedule down the stretch, but in others, you can see how that could potentially turn on its head, and Seattle could start to really get on a roll there down the stretch. That Seattle-Vancouver game could be for the Pacific Division title. You just never know, and they get the bye before that game, so another positive bye situation there for Seattle. John Fullerton with the $4.99 Super Chat. All these folks, but only 18 likes. Hit that like button. #Nana. Thank you for that, John. And glad we got to look at the Seattle schedule. We're staying out west. That's the popular division right now, the Pacific Division. We go from Seattle now to Vancouver to take a look at the Legion 2024 winter schedule. They start at home against Portland and then at San Diego. So back-to-back divisional games to start the season. No team received more than 2 divisional games within the first 5 weeks, and theirs just happened to fall in Week 1 and 2, and then they get a bye. So finally out of division in Week 4, that's a rematch against Canton, and they're going to be at home. Mike, that Vancouver wants to prove a point there after getting after that disappointing finish in the wild card round. Then in Week 5, they go to Carolina. Those teams have have history. Of course, Sudo Nakai is now the GM over there. Sudo Nakai and Ike McBride have history. Andy Hamilton has history with Carolina. So that game is a big one on a Friday night in Raleigh. And then the renewed rivalry against Denver in Week 6. They got Fort Worth in Week 7, which is always a great game. Florida in Week 8 at home. That's always a competitive and exciting game. And this is a fun schedule for Vancouver. And then a bye week before, back-to-back home games down the stretch. That Week 14 game is scheduled to be the second to last game of the regular season. If Mexico City improves, this is one of the best rivalries in the league. Vancouver, Mexico City in Week 14. Mike, it's worth noting that because the divisions are odd-numbered, we can't have all division games in Week 14. So for the first time in years, we don't have all divisional games in Week 14. So that could get spicy. Your thoughts on Vancouver?
Well, Vancouver's coming off of a successful season. The playoff season is a successful season, but maybe not successful enough in the eyes of Andy Hamilton and the top brass over there in Vancouver, because I know they're extremely anxious to finally take that next step, get into the semifinals and to the final, the SFL championship game. I know that's the goal for every team, but I know that it's a specific goal that a successful franchise as Vancouver has been over the years. I know that's something that they're looking forward to, taking that next step. And up and down season last season, I thought they really pulled it together mid-season. And with that being said, I'm curious as to see how they perform coming into season 22. Can they solidify what they've done in the past, and take an early step this season, and become the Vancouver Legion that we're accustomed to seeing in years past. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of a mixed match schedule here. Start off with Portland, and then you're away at San Diego. Then you come back after a bye week and you take on Canton, another playoff team. So kind of mixed match here, but I can see where Vancouver can make some inroads and have a very solid season.
Mike, I look at weeks 7 through 11 and I think, man, that's tough. You've got Fort Worth and then Florida. Those are two games that I mean, it's rigorous preparation for that. Then you have 3 in a row on the road, and one of those is in division. One of those is against a playoff team in DC from last season. So that's a pretty tough stretch for Vancouver there. So they're going to have to make some inroads early in their season. They want to have some success. $5 super chat from Alex Marshall. Queen City, please. Excited to announce our signings tomorrow. And yes, this offseason is just moving right along, Mike. And I personally am loving the pace as we are getting ready for more football out there. Here's a look at Queen City's winter 2024 schedule. They start with a couple of road games at Baltimore and at Houston. Getting Baltimore week 1, tough draw. But I could argue, Mike, wouldn't you rather play Baltimore in week 1 than in week 12 or whatever when they've, when they have a handle on things? But a couple of road games there, and then a week 3 bye. So they also have a week 4 home opener. That comes against the Ramblers, followed by a home game against rival Atlanta. 2 on the road. That's kind of the pattern here for Queen City. They go 2-2-2-2-2-2 in terms of home and away games. So a couple of back-to-back road trips. Week 12 is their second bye before taking on Portland and DC down the home stretch. Much improved team from last season, Mike. How do you think Queen City's going to fare with this one?
Well, as you mentioned, Baltimore to start things off, and it's better to get them early. Cam, do you remember the show? Well, I don't know how old you were during this time frame, but do you remember the show Star Trek: The Next Generation?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, Optimus Klein was saying we didn't post the stream in the server, and he was right. I didn't hit enter, and so there you go. It's amazing, but I can make a mistake. Thank you, Optimus, for letting me know. Okay, so we're talking about Star Trek? Is that what you said?
Yeah, The Next Generation. You remember the Star Trek: The Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard and all those people? I
would be lying to you if I told you that I did.
Well, I know it's not about ice cream or football, but
exactly.
I knew.
What's your point?
My point being, there was a species on this show called the Borg, and the Borg, what they would do, Cam, you would get maybe 1 or 2 shots at them, and then they would adapt, and then you couldn't harm them anymore. So that was my reason for saying that about Baltimore. You better get them early, take your 1 or 2 shots, but if you don't get them by then, they're going to adjust and end up in the championship game again. So that was my point. But anyway, you ruined it. And anyway, let's go on with the rest of the schedule. Queen City, improved team from last season, but man, Queen City have not reached the heights of the championship level that they've been accustomed to throughout the seasons over the last few years, and I know they're hoping to get back to that, and I'm rooting for them to get back to that as well. It's nothing like a traditional power, not being there. And Queen City, that's one of the franchises we look forward to being in the playoffs and competing for championships season in and season out. So hopefully they'll be able to get back to that.
If I could split my fingers and say, "May the force be with you," I would. No, I know it's live long and prosper.
That's not it.
I just wanted to tick you off and everybody else out there that gets upset at that stuff even more. Let's move on. For those of you just joining us because you need an alarm for every event in your life, this is the season 22 schedule release show. And Mike St. Green and I are going over team schedules. You can watch back on the archive to see week 1 and Monday night spectaculars and all that good stuff. $5 super chat from Chad Rowland. Mike needs Rogaine on that goatee. Mike, look, I'm going to stick up for you. I'm going gray too, and I think it looks good, right? What's wrong with just being natural?
That's a bunch of experience on that chin, Cam.
Exactly.
I don't fake it. We can't fake it, and
we're not fake here.
Yeah, we don't. If I put some type of stuff in here, then I look fake, and then everybody say, "Oh, Mike is dyeing his beard now." That wouldn't fly.
He's having a midlife crisis, and him and Don must be on the rocks. All sorts of stuff would come out, and we don't need that. By the way, I think it was Chad Rowland's first super chat on a live stream, so thank you, Mike, I guess, for having a old looking beard.
Yeah,
helping out helping support the channel.
I do what I can do, Cam.
So that's all good. If you're just barf, says Chad. If you're just joining us, we super chat these schedules as we go around the league and talk about these schedules. So if you have not seen yours, give us a super chat and help support the channel, and we'll give your team some shine. We have talked about, we've talked about Vancouver, Seattle, LA so far. I'm losing track of who we've gotten to. Arizona as well. But let's go to the defending champs while we're looking for a super chat to tell us where to go next. And let's see.
Man, Cam, you're still good at reading my mind. I was going to say, let's go to the champs.
That's right. Let's Florida gets a free pass for winning the championship. Here's what they got. They're at home against Charleston before an early week 2 bye. They get the bye before they take on Fort Worth on Monday night. So think about that, Mike. They go 17 days after opening night to play their second game. So that is quite a bit of weight there. But then they get Baltimore in week 4. That's your championship rematch at Baltimore on a Sunday night, February 4th, followed by Portland. And then, man, things get crazy. Alamo City, Arizona, and Vancouver all on the road. So they got Baltimore on the road, Alamo City on the road, Arizona on the road, and then Vancouver on the road. 4 straight playoff teams on the road, and then they get a bye before taking on division rival Atlanta. Down the stretch, it gets a little bit, quote-unquote, easier. Denver, Jacksonville, Canton, Carolina, the last 2 at home. Is that what struck you, too, about Florida's schedule, that 3-game road trip right there in the middle?
Well, the first, let's say, 8 weeks pretty much struck me as like, man, this is a defending champion schedule. I mean, you're going to have to go back out there in season 22 and prove that season 21's championship was not a fluke. And we know this franchise historically. We know, them winning and going to championship games, that wasn't a fluke. But you're definitely going to have to prove yourself early and often with this schedule coming out the way it is. I mean, Alamo City, Arizona, Vancouver, Baltimore to rematch week 4, and even go up to Fort Worth week 3. Max Paul and the Florida Storm, they're going to have their work cut out for them early and often on this schedule.
$4.99 super chat. Show the yacht haters schedule, and thankfully they put Charleston in parentheses because I didn't know what they were talking about. So that's good. Do you have any idea, Mike? What
Who,
they're
who
talking
are they? Who are they called?
The Yacht Haters? YACHT?
Yeah,
Am
I
I
have
just?
no. I'm lost.
I
You
guess.
almost got me at
I
a
guess.
lost for
I
words on
guess
that
I'm.
one, and I
I
know that's
guess
hard
I'm.
to do.
Guess I'm too old, Charles. Yeah, you know every cultural reference in the book. You're always bragging about it.
That one I have no clue.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it can help Charleston season. This is what their schedule looks like. They're on the road at Florida in week 1, then home against Jacksonville and Arizona weeks 2 and 3. They have week 5 and week 12 byes, and they finish the season at Atlanta and at Minnesota, back-to-back games there. They've got back-to-back Texas teams week 9 and week 10. But all in all, a pretty balanced schedule for Charleston as the playoff teams from last season are spaced out. What do you see in Charleston's schedule?
Yeah, I was going to use the word tame. It looked like a pretty tame schedule, a schedule that they can kind of, meander their way through. No big hand grenades coming at them, week after week after week. A tough one against Florida to open, as we mentioned, in Florida's schedule. And, and I really hate to say this about Jacksonville. Right now they still have so much to prove. As we know, Jacksonville, that's my first team, and I've always got, going to have respect for those guys. But I'm really looking forward to them being able to turn things around over there. But as of right now, that's a manageable game for Charleston. And then, they backdoor that obviously with Arizona. Then they got Motor City. I want to call them Detroit all the time, but then they got Motor City, and that's another step down from the elite of this league. No disrespect to anybody, but a pretty, like I said, mixed match schedule that I think Charleston, coming off a playoff, they should be able to manage.
Of note, 2 playoff rematches on the schedule. Week 7 wild card game against Seattle. They will get them at home instead of going to Seattle this time. And then week 10 at Fort Worth. And look, John Lakeman's got some revenge, some business to do. Not only does he play the team that hurt him in week 10, but then in week 11 right after that, he plays his former team. Queen City comes to his house. I believe Charleston went to Queen City last season. So a couple of big games there for John Lakeman, the signal caller for Charleston. Los Angeles with a $5 super chat. Cam and Mike can't go anywhere. Can't go outside without getting mauled by the women. I totally agree. It's a problem. We gotta fend
I
them
was
off.
just out earlier and getting hit on, Cam. So
I'm not surprised, man. She was probably like, "Do you want to move seats? Do you want to move down closer?" And you were like, "I don't know. That's against the rules." I don't. LA, why don't you tell us whose schedule that you want to see, since you got a bonus super chat. $9.99 super chat. Denver schedule. Injury is fine. We'll be ready for Nashville this weekend. That's from Keith Wheeler, who got hurt in the SFLM playoffs last night. By the way, Mike, if you missed the SFLM playoffs last night, wow. All the games were decided by 7 points or less. Albuquerque upset Philadelphia. It was a lot of fun, and watching these developmental players shine has been fun. I know you've been on the road a lot, Mike. Have you gotten to check out any minor league action this season?
I have checked out minor league action, and I did catch the Albuquerque and was it Philadelphia, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I did catch a good portion of that game. The Adams obviously pulled that one out in the end, but that was hard fought throughout that ball game. And the minor leagues are outside of let's say the championship game, draft, the show we're doing tonight, free agency, just to see the minors, leaguers play and get the first opportunity, to perform in this league. A vast majority of them, and some of the developmental guys that are able to get down there and show what they can do. It's always an exciting time to see those guys get on the field and play.
The second round is Monday, an elimination game for 4 teams. Only 2 will advance, and 6 will remain. So now to Denver's schedule. Thank you, Keith, for the super chat. At home against Jacksonville to start in week 1, followed by a road game at DC, home for Louisiana, back on the road for Arizona, and then a bye week then at Vancouver. So the first thing that jumps out to me is 4 of their first 5 road games are against playoff teams from last season, but they do get Florida week 11 off a bye. In week 10, they're at home against Motor City and Tulsa down the stretch. Your thoughts on Denver's schedule as they try to reload as their rebuilding process continues.
Yeah, we're talking about a former championship team here, Cam, and they've kind of been on that rebuild mode since then because they had a bunch of retirements, and guys leaving. And it seems like that's been a constant thing for them, but they kind of surprised everyone coming out of the gate last season, going 3-2 early on, and before things kind of, fell off for them a little bit. But this schedule, I think it's kind of manageable for Denver if they can get things going in the right direction. We'll see what happens with them in free agency starting tomorrow, seeing that they could fill some holes that they have. One big matchup here, well, one that stands out, Cam, is we no longer have Vice Wars. That kind of sucks
true.
a little bit. But as I mentioned to you in the past, my honorary Vice Wars is Tulsa. It's a lot of stuff goes on in Oklahoma, Cam, that I really didn't realize until I traveled around a little bit. There's a dispensary almost on every corner over there. So that maybe that could be our new Vice Wars, like semi Vice War matchup there in Week 14. That kind of stands out to me, that the new mini Vice Wars right there.
Maybe so. Jeremy's going to have to get Dion and company on the phone. I see that the chat is killing me because Chad put a $5 super chat in about his beard, or about your beard, but then I didn't show his schedule because I was just so Well,
since it was about me, that means it should be Houston's schedule, right?
I think the chat would totally kill me if I showed Houston before Indianapolis. So, all right, we'll go to Indy. I'm sorry, everyone. Clearly in Week 12, Mexico City and Denver, new Vice Wars. Who knows? We'll see what Denver wants to do with that. All right, we'll go to Indy so that Chad can stop being so depressed. Here's the Ramblers winter 2024 schedule. They start with home games against Atlanta and Canton. They're on the road to Jacksonville and Queen City before that Monday night home game in Week 5, followed by a Week 6 bye. They also have a Week 12 bye. They finished the season with 4 teams that made the playoffs last season, including 2 road games at Minnesota, the big rivalry game, and then at San Diego. Minnesota-Indy once on the schedule because all divisional teams play once in this format, and we all know that is impossible not to be a big game. It's always a good one. And look, Indianapolis gets the bye before Minnesota, so they catch a break. Minnesota does not have a bye before playing Indy, so Indy gets a slight advantage there over their rival Legend. Your thoughts on the Ramblers schedule?
Yeah, and all jokes aside, Cam, Indianapolis, Minnesota, they were 2 of the most surprising teams to me last season as far as record-wise goes. I know how great the front offices are with both of those franchises. Chad, after spending many seasons with him over in London, I know how hard he works, and I know how much work he puts in. Him and Adam Wiseman over there. So it was really a surprise to see those guys struggle the way they did last season. But we mentioned the word on the street matchup in Week 5. Yeah, I'm going to keep calling it that. That's going to be great to see with those 2 guys going at it. And of course, week 13. To me right now, Cam, there's really no bigger rivalry in this league than Indianapolis and Minnesota.
Canton, Arizona, Vancouver, Fort Worth. The first 4 teams that made the playoffs on their schedule are at home. So Indianapolis gets a little bit of a break there. All in all, 6 playoff teams on their schedule. And a lot of bright green. Atlanta, Queen City, Louisiana, and Minnesota. Added that new kind of Kelly green to their look. That looks sharp. And look, Indianapolis, San Diego, Week 14. That could be a huge game. One of the more interesting on the schedule for Week 14. Okay. So I don't get flamed again in the chat. Did I miss anyone? Anyone that has given a super chat? I don't think so. Who wants to see their schedule next? In the meantime, we'll just talk about some of the better teams from last season. Let's go to Baltimore and look at the Baltimore Vultures schedule. They start with home games against Queen City and Seattle. They're also at home against Florida in Week 4. They play Mexico City off a Week 5 bye. DC off a Week 12 bye, and then they get Florida at home as well. Week 7 at San Diego, Week 8 at Arizona, lots of frequent flyer miles, and a Week 6 game at Mexico City for that matter too. So 3 straight long road trips for the Vultures off that bye. and then they finish the season with the Dragons and Fort Worth. Another late game date with Atlanta in week 11. I don't remember the exact week, but we had that game on Monday night, and Atlanta gave them all they could handle in that one. Your thoughts on Baltimore trying to get that championship back?
Yeah, and so far, Cam, I think outside of Arizona and Florida, this is probably on paper one of the other toughest schedules that I've seen come out here for season 22. But Baltimore, towards the end of last season, as I mentioned, you could take your shots at them early. We were kind of wondering were they going to be the same Baltimore that we were accustomed to seeing. They kind of struggled a little bit. Obviously not under 500 struggling, but struggling from what we were accustomed to seeing from the Baltimore Vultures.
Well, they were 1-3,
Yeah,
so I mean, you're right on that, at least very early on in the season.
Yeah, very early on they were struggling. You had a chance to take advantage of some things that they were trying to figure out, but towards the end of the season and in the playoffs, to me, Cam, they started to look like the old Baltimore Vultures that I was accustomed to seeing. A lot of Ivory Irving, Jack Whitmore, performing, balling out. And an unfortunate injury to T-Roy Gaines in the championship game kind of derailed some things that they were, starting to develop in the season later on. But tough schedule, but they're the Baltimore Vultures, and I think they can adjust anything that's in front of them.
There's some sneaky games on here. Of course, Florida beat them last season twice. Motor City beat Baltimore last season, and they are back on the schedule week 9. Look, Minnesota was 4-8, but they played everybody tough. They're on the schedule in week 10. So even some of the games that may not stand out, and look, Queen City gave Baltimore all they could handle too. That game was close in the third quarter before Baltimore pulled away. So even the games that are on the schedule that are like, Baltimore should definitely win. There's some interesting matchups there because they got a few rematches that gave them some problems. So that's a look at Baltimore. All right, no more super chats, so we're just gonna keep the show rolling. Let's see, Denise wants Atlanta next. Here's a look at Atlanta's schedule. They start with 4 out of 5 on the road. That's tough. They have a week 3 home game against Los Angeles. They drew a week 14 bye, so they're hoping that their season just doesn't end early. 3 of their 4 at home down the stretch, but they're all against playoff teams. They have Houston sandwiched there in the middle in week 12. Your thoughts on Atlanta?
Well, Atlanta has a lot to prove this season, Cam. I was really kind of surprised at the season that they had last season, but a couple of matchups here that they're going to have to take advantage of. Week 9 stands out to me against Mexico City, depending on the type of Mexico City team that we see going into next season. And talking about making adjustments late in the season, they were one of those teams, Mexico City, I'm speaking of, that was starting to make adjustments late in the season and get some things figured out. But yeah, another tough division down there, being in it with Florida. Jacksonville, they're always going to play you tough. But a pretty straightforward schedule here that I'm looking at for Atlanta, and it's going to be imperative. It's interesting to me to see how they bounce back and take on this schedule for next season.
Yeah, the Swarm, it was kind of interesting. We thought they were going to get it going, and then eventually it just got too late in the season, and they just kind of ran out of time. They started. Kyle Finnemore had a brilliant season, made the All-Star game, but they expect more out of that team, so that'll be interesting there. All right, how about the Fort Worth Toros, who finished unbeaten last season? See what they've got. The Alamo City rematch in week 1 is certainly going to be exciting. Then they draw Minnesota for their home opener in week 2 before going to Florida, back at home for Houston. They get Vancouver off a bye, and they get Baltimore off a bye, week 13 and 6. Are there bye weeks? Couple of road games at Mexico City, at San Diego in the middle portion of the season, but not anything too crazy for the Toros in terms of hefty road trips. Your thoughts on the Toros?
Well, as I just mentioned, Baltimore and a couple other teams with a tough schedule, man. Cam, it's not a lightweight nowhere on this schedule for Fort Worth, but hey, that's the price of being undefeated and going to the semifinals last season. As we mentioned earlier with the Monday Night Spectacular, that's a great opening matchup and a tough matchup for them. Minnesota, week 2, they're going to be looking to bounce back and from a 4-8 season last season and missing the playoffs. They got defending champs in week 3, and the entire South Division, traditionally is tough. So Mexico City, Louisiana is now a part of that. Houston, of course, week 4. Vancouver's mixed in there. Then you finish it off with the runners up in Baltimore. So yeah, tough sledding week in and week out for Fort Worth. They're going to have to prove themselves quite often coming up next season.
Can't wait to see what they do to follow up, what was a historically great season for Fort Worth Toros. $9.99 super chat from Jay Ballmer. Hate Texas teams. Let's show Jacksonville, though. Okay, great. Jacksonville Kings, Mike St. Green's former team, Jay Ballmer's former team. See what the Kings have. They start with 2 games on the road at Denver and at Charleston in division. Before hosting Indianapolis in their home opener. A week 4 bye sends them back on the road the next week at Mexico City for that big Monday night game in memory of Matt Wilson on February 12th. They have a week 9 bye before road games at Carolina and Seattle. And their season wraps up pretty tough. Seattle, Florida, Louisiana, at Canton. Canton is a rematch of week 1 convention weekend in season 21. Where that finished in a nail-biter in Florida. Now they'll go to Canton. Thoughts on the Kings?
Yeah, it's really one player on this team, Cam, that I really root for, and hopefully he's coming back. I hadn't heard word yet. I guess we'll find that out when the free agent signing period happens. OJ Bruin, Cam, I root for him about more than any other quarterback and player overall in this league. I really, want him to be successful in this league. And yeah, my old franchise that drafted me, man, I really, root for them overall as well. But yeah, I really root for OJ. Hopefully he can bounce back and have establish himself here with Jacksonville and get these guys back into the playoffs. Yeah, tough matchups throughout this schedule. Of course, the division that they play in is going to be tough with Florida being there, Atlanta being there. I think they were part of a division with Louisiana last season, so that Louisiana's out, but they still have to play those guys. And tough stretch, 12, 13, and 14 with playoff teams in the division. And it's always a rivalry game with Florida, no matter what the records are. So that's a great matchup. And that's the one I always look forward to on Jacksonville's schedule, that Florida and Jacksonville matchup.
Yeah, they get Atlanta, Carolina, Florida down the stretch. And then the Louisiana game, they're not in division anymore, but last season, Louisiana beat them down twice. I liked what Jacksonville did last season. Their defense was just a little too one-dimensional, and there were times where they just were in bad matchups, like with Louisiana, and that defense was just unable to hold up. But that was probably Jacksonville's best team in the last couple years, and I did think that O.J. Bruin took a step forward. Kenny Slider coming in later in the season. They were running dual quarterback stuff. It was exciting. So that's a look at the Jacksonville Kings schedule. All right, let's do a little bit of alphabetical order now as we get into the later stages of this show. Alamo City's schedule. They start with Fort Worth and Motor City at home before a couple games on the road. We're going to speed this process up just a little bit as we go along down the latter stretch of these team schedules, but 3 out of 4 on the road to end the season. Just one home game after that big Arizona game on Monday night in Week 9. Your thoughts on Alamo City?
Yeah, of course, they're in the South as well. Tough matchups, each one of those games. The Week 5 matchup with Seattle, that really stands out in this schedule, Cam. Alamo City, of course, great season, only losing to Fort Worth, and big matchup there for both teams. Seattle, we're going to see where they stand in Week 5, see if they've gotten off to a good start and to back up their playoff season from a season ago.
Seattle and Florida back-to-back weeks, and then a breather, right? A breather, which will be much needed after studying up on those two opponents. Okay, let's go to Canton now. The Canton Classics start with, two really tough games in the first 3 weeks with Arizona and Baltimore, but they do get them both at home. That rematch with Vancouver in Week 4. D.C. is a tough game. The North Division just got tougher, and Baltimore and D.C. are on the front half of this schedule. They finish at home against Jacksonville, but overall a pretty balanced schedule. They are on the road for nearly a month if you squeeze that Week 10 buy-in with back-to-back divisional games. But, hey, at least they're not playing the same opponent in back-to-back weeks. Don't have to worry about that this season. Your thoughts on Canton?
Probably the most interesting first-time playoff team as what, for me, especially, other than Seattle, especially now, losing their head coach. How are they going to, back that up? Are they going to be able to continue that momentum with, new personnel up front and things like that to build on that playoff season that they had? I mean, outside of, coming into the league and, being an expansion team and struggling the first couple of seasons, Canton is in so many ways have been the face of the SFL and the things that they do off the field and with the community up there in Canton. So how can they build on the off-field success? Can they, they built on that greatly. How can they build on the on-field success that they had last season? That's what I'm be looking forward to seeing with the Canton Classics coming up this next season.
Over to Carolina, the Carolina Skyhawks will start on the road at Tulsa. Those two teams have a long history, including Carolina's playoff win over the Desperados. They will finish with a bye before getting Florida on the road in Week 14. So 2 weeks to prepare for a potentially big game in the final week of the season. They're also at Charleston, at Louisiana on that back half of the schedule. Probably their toughest stretch, that Week 3 through Week 5, D.C., Alamo City, Vancouver. That's a pretty hefty slate. They do get 2 at home. Your thoughts on the Skyhawks?
Carolina, Cam, they strike me as one of those franchises and teams that it seems like they're right there on the cusp of really doing something great. I mean, they made the playoffs, I think, a season before last season, and missed out this last season. But I like this franchise. I like where they're going. Playing down there. What do we call the division now? Atlantic, or we're still calling it the Atlantic over there? We're calling that the East.
Atlantic got split up. Yeah, we're going East.
So yeah, we're calling that the East. That's going to be tough division to make headway in to play. Defending champion, playoff team in Charleston over there. Interesting matchup that I can kind of compare them to. Just stands out to me that Week 9 against Portland. What will that game mean to both franchises? Where will they be, at that point of the season for both of them? And that could be some playoff positioning and who's going to be sweating it out on, the playoff show day. That Week 9 matchup, they may determine some of that.
Stephen Black, Minnesota schedule when? Well, Super Chat gets you to the front of the line, and we'll spend a little bit more on them as well. And Ethan saying after Lou. Well, depends, I guess, but that's a look at Carolina's schedule. Okay, we went over Charleston, right? They had Florida. Okay, so now we go to D.C. Let's take a look at the D.C. Dragons schedule. This is a weird one. They got 3 straight at home, but they play 3 teams that didn't make the playoffs last season. Louisiana, Denver, Carolina. They got to take care of business. Then they have a bye. Then they have 4 road games in a row with another bye sandwiched in. Fort Worth, Canton, Jacksonville, Seattle. So a lot of their dates are early at home, and then they go on the road for a while. They'll finish up with back-to-back divisional games hosting Baltimore and Queen City, but that's a long time to be away from home. January 28th to March 16th is the gap between home games there for D.C. How do you view this schedule, Mike?
Well, Cam, if they can manage the just being on the road part of this schedule, this seems like on paper, just seems like a very favorable schedule for DC. I mean, I know how they like to play. They like to play tough, grind it out, football. Going to see a lot of Kevin save for the most part for this team. They play great, tough defense. But just to look at this schedule, I would take it if I were DC. It's nothing that seems too, outlandish, too overwhelming. Of course, they always going to have that matchup of the DC metro area with Baltimore, being in a division rivalry of theirs. That's always going to be tough. But this should be a favorable schedule just on paper for DC.
I think they got to watch out, Mike, when you talk about strength of victory. Of course, D.C. was in the mix of that tiebreaker this past season. They got to watch out that they get some big wins in that middle of the schedule because down the stretch, if Motor City, Tulsa, Queen City, right, if those teams are not improved and not up to snuff, they could struggle to get a meaningful win if they,
Yeah.
you know, if they took care of business early, but then they lost to Fort Worth and Canton and Seattle. They may be in a position where they've got to get something big down the stretch, and they don't have it. That Baltimore game could be the only one that could vault them up the tiebreaker ladder. So that's something to keep in mind with DC. Okay, your boys in Houston, the Houston Headhunters, Mike. You get 3 straight home games just like DC. San Diego, Queen City, Alamo City before going to Fort Worth, followed by a bye, and then at Portland. You've got a back-to-back East Coast swing against Canton and Charleston, and then you end the season on the road at Arizona, at Louisiana, 2 teams that are really pretty much always in it every season down the stretch. So, how do you see Houston's schedule? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it?
Easiest schedule on the map, Cam. 12-0, no doubt about it. But no, just kidding. I mean, that's tough to start the season off with San Diego. That's going to be an interesting matchup for a whole lot of reasons. A lot of guys over there that I former teammates of mine share the locker room with. I'd assume my boy Johnny Pickle is going to be back, so it's going to be interesting being opposite sidelines of him. You know, Dave Axe's great relationship with him. So great way to, interesting way to start the schedule. Man, you look at Alamo City, right there, week 3, that's tough. And then backdoor that with Fort Worth. Like I said, as I mentioned, anything in the South is going to be tough. Obviously, we look forward to Mexico City bouncing back and being competitive again and in the playoff hunt again this season. Of course, then you look at a matchup with Eddie in Arizona. It's going to be tough sledding for us, Cam. But I know some of the things that are happening in the front office, and we have guys that are excited, and I'm excited about what's happening behind the scenes, and we're looking forward to the challenge of next season.
All right, Louisiana is up next, and they start at DC. That's always a tough one. Then at home against Portland for their home opener on Sunday, January 21st, under the lights. They get a week 5 bye before taking on Seattle and Canton in back-to-back weeks. And then their week 9 bye is before Alamo City in week 10. They finish off with Houston. But meat of the schedule there, Seattle, Canton, Alamo City, kind of in that middle portion. But all in all, it could have bounced worse for Louisiana, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, for those type of teams like Louisiana, 1 year they're up, next year they're down. Obviously missed the playoffs last season. They kind of hover around that 5-7 to 7-5 range. But as you mentioned, those games week 6, week 7, week 8, week 11 against Carolina. That's what separates you from that 6-6. And actually the last couple of seasons, 6-6 hasn't been good enough. I don't know if that's going to change with the condensed teams, but it may. But you have to be 7-5 over the last couple of seasons to get in. But those games, if we hold true to what's been happening the past couple of seasons, those games that we just mentioned, those are going to make the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. And we'll see what happens from there. But Louisiana, they're always capable. They do great things over there, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be competitive and ready to go as well again this season.
It's worth noting 4 out of their first 5 is on the road, but then they have 4 straight home games sandwiched by a week 9 bye. So they go from February 17th to March 30th without having a road game, and they've got Indy and Carolina, Alamo City, Canton, all in that mix. That Canton game was a great game from early last season. Gary Clem, Gary Burney taking on their former team, all that stuff. Those franchises have a lot of friendship there, friendly rivalry. So that's very interesting there from Louisiana, kind of the polar opposite of DC in that regard. There's a look at the Revolution schedule. Okay, Mexico City, the Aztecs. Here's a look at their schedule. They have an early bye, week 2. They are at Motor City and then at Minnesota. So that game against Louisiana, which is on Monday, February 5th. That's a typo there. But that Monday night game against Louisiana is their home opener, and they'll have back-to-back Monday night home games to start their home slate, and then their home games continue. 5, count them, 5, Mike, straight home games. Louisiana, Jacksonville, both back-to-back Monday nighters, Baltimore, L.A., and Fort Worth. And you know Mexico City wants revenge on Fort Worth because the Toros just flat embarrassed them twice last season. And then they're back on the road again. 4 out of their last 5 to end the season are on the road, including back-to-back games against playoff teams in the final 2 weeks of the season. So maybe Mexico City gets hot, uses that home stretch as momentum, but certainly a momentous occasion for the Aztecs. We don't see too many schedules like this in the league.
Yeah, and Mexico City, like I said, we've talked about them a little bit, being on other team schedules so far tonight, but they did start to get things together a little bit towards the end of last season, start playing a little bit better week in and week out, even though it didn't really reflect itself in the win-loss column. But I was surprised to see how they started out the season. But then again, Mexico City had a lot of huge shoes to fill over the course of the offseason. Mike Daggs retiring, of course, Matt Wilson at the quarterback position, and it seemed like they had some departures mid-season, so they kind of struggled quite a bit last season. But it was kind of a surprise. So I'm looking forward to them as an established, traditional winning franchise to see how they can bounce back this season and perform. It's going to be tough in the South Division, as we always know, but it's some matchups in there that they could look like they can take advantage of, especially week 1. That's a matchup that I'm pretty sure looking at now, saying, hey, we can come out and go 1-0 in that ball game, and a bye week, and then they take on Minnesota, who came off of a down season. So Mexico City has an opportunity to get off to a good start after struggling early last season.
The Aztecs were kind of the biggest conundrum of last season because so much of their team felt like they were moving forward into the future, but some of their team felt like maybe they were a little stuck in the past, not necessarily with Matt Wilson, just the play on the field. So, looking forward to seeing if Mexico City can sort of make a more full transition coming up in season 22. All right, let's go to Minnesota with this refreshed branding. They've got so many images and marks. I can't wait to see what they do with their uniforms. The trees reminds, if they don't do a Minnesota Timberwolves like tree striping or something, I'm gonna be upset because that's a great addition to where the Sasquatch lives. They get that week 1 bye. We talked about it. Their next bye isn't until week 11, and they get it before Arizona. So they get it before a quality opponent, but they do get Baltimore and Arizona back-to-back down the latter stretch of the season. They have 3 straight on the road: L.A., Tulsa, Carolina, a manageable schedule there if those 3 teams do not see greater improvement. They finish with 3 straight home games after the bye week: Arizona, Indy, Charleston down the stretch. Not an easy 3-game stretch by any means there either. What's your thoughts on Minnesota?
Yeah, we talked about Minnesota in that early bye week, early in the show. But now that we see who they're playing, give me 2 extra weeks to prepare for Fort Worth. So yeah, that's definitely advantage Minnesota now that we see the schedule. You get a week extra to prepare to see what Fort Worth looks like in week 1, and then just like Mexico City, going to be looking towards them in week 3 is that say, hey, we can take advantage of a team trying to get things figured out. Minnesota's probably going to be saying the same thing about Mexico City, that, hey, we can take advantage of them trying to get things figured out and try to get this thing off to a good start. And not saying that they will lose to Fort Worth. Of course, we don't know, but we can say based on what history has said. Let's just say if they do get off to a bad start against Fort Worth, looking at week 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a chance for them to bounce back and make some noise and get out of an early hole. So Minnesota, as you mentioned, that they can make some hay and get some things turned around if they can prepare well for those weeks 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Even Mexico City, I mean, that's 5 straight games against teams that didn't make the playoffs last season. 5 of their first 6. So Minnesota 4-8 had a down year last season. They really have a chance to right the ship before they get to the second half of the season where it gets tougher. Seattle, Baltimore, Arizona, Charleston, their rival Indy, who's not just going to give it to them, right? So definitely a tale of two halves for the Legend and their schedule based on records from last season. Okay, Motor City is up next. They start with Mexico City, Tulsa, Charleston, and Queen City at home. 4 of their first 5 games are at home. 4 of their last 5 are on the road because they draw a Week 14 bye, and they get Baltimore, D.C., Canton back-to-back-to-back in division play with 2 on the road against Baltimore and D.C. in back-to-back weeks. That is clearly a tall task for the V8s.
I'll tell you what, I'm laughing, Cam, because Motor City, good or bad, they're one of the most interesting teams in this league.
Always interesting.
Without a shadow of a doubt, either they're going to run 12 fullbacks, or I think they're looking for 10 tight ends this season, or I think they ran 3 quarterbacks. But
they got to turn it into wins, Mike. They can't just be interesting. They got to get some wins.
Well, like I said, good or bad, they're going to make it interesting. I don't know what these guys are going to do from season to season, but they always make it interesting and fun to figure out what to try to figure out what they're going to do, and that's usually to their advantage early on because they tend to start fast, but then the league adjusts and figure them out a little bit, and they tend to struggle. But this franchise, obviously coming over from St. Louis, they've always made things interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Motor City has to offer this upcoming season.
The Portland Fleet are at Vancouver and at Louisiana to start the season. Their home slate starts in Week 3. Boats and Planes. The rivalry is back with San Diego back in the Pacific Division. That is Saturday night, January 27th. They get a bye before Florida. A strong bye pull there from the Portland Fleet to get that before the Florida Storm. And then they get a Week 10 bye before Arizona. So another strong bye pull. Going back to the beginning of the show, we talked about how these matchups were put on the schedule in random order. And so where the byes fell was just totally how they fell. And look at what Portland gets there. That's a huge benefit. Middle of the season, Houston, Motor City, Denver, Carolina. 4 straight games against teams that didn't make the playoffs from last season, but they end with 2 on the road, Queen City and division rival Seattle. Portland, they're just one of those teams, Mike. You just, come on, we got to get a playoff trip out of these guys. They're always right there, 5-7, 6-6. They just have not figured it out how to get over the hump.
Yeah, aside from Houston, Cam, and Jacob Bovet knows this in the front office over there. Now, this is one of my favorite teams, most favorite teams in the league, aside from Houston. I root for these guys. There's something about them I liked from day one that this organization came into the league a few seasons ago, for I think season 15, and they struggled early on, as most expansion teams do. And then, as you mentioned, now they've gotten into that 5-7, 6-6, lose out on tiebreakers. They took a slight step back this past season, but yeah, I'm looking forward to this team taking the next step forward. Obviously, I don't need them to do that on Week 6 of this schedule, but there's some games in there. There's some teams in there that they could take advantage of if these teams are still down. The Week 8 matchup against Denver. That's gonna be one of those games that makes a difference late in the season when we're talking about playoff positioning. The Queen City game, Week 13, that stands out. The LA game, Week 12. Both of those teams are going to be battling and scrapping for playoff positioning. So can they finally take that step forward and get to the playoffs, something that I think they are talented enough to do. And I'm looking forward to seeing if they can.
Only 2 teams play Arizona off a bye, #facts. Okay, so that's Portland. That's Portland's schedule. And now we're looking at, we need San Diego, right? San Diego Mavericks with the sharpened primary mark. It looks really good as they head into their third season in the Dave Axis owner era. They'll start at Houston, and then they'll host Vancouver in that big Pacific game. Then they turn around and take on Portland. They get a Week 5 and Week 8 bye, so their byes are both kind of in the middle of the season. They do get Fort Worth off the bye in Week 9, and then they finish up with Canton, Tulsa, Indy. Pretty balanced schedule from San Diego. How it fell out, their playoff opponents are pretty balanced, but worth noting, Baltimore, Fort Worth, Seattle, kind of sandwiched in the middle of the season. I feel like it's a theme, Mike. These Week 6 through Week 10 schedules.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot decided in the middle of this season as these teams grapple for superiority in season 22.
And you know what's been easy to forget, and I kind of forgot this, Cam, that this is also coming off a first-time playoff franchise. But it seems like once Dave Axis and company took over, it changed your thought process of how you felt about the San Diego Mavericks up until that point. But yeah, coming off a playoff appearance, but I think they're going to improve coming into next season. I think those guys are great front office over there, great ownership. Johnny Pickler, I'm assuming, like I said, is going to return at quarterback. We'll see what happens in free agency starting tomorrow. But yeah, these guys are going to have something to prove, though. Even though I think they are going to improve, as you mentioned, that the middle of the schedule there, Baltimore, Fort Worth, playoff team in Seattle. Follow that up by Canton. There in Week 12, going to be tough for San Diego to repeat a playoff appearance. But if any franchise is capable, I think they are.
And the last team scheduled, the Tulsa Desperados, coming off of a disappointing season, but they have some new life under Coach Wade Phillips as they're trying to, kind of create a new identity. Gabriel Manning is always going to be there as that identity. They start with a Carolina home game, then a Week 2 bye. Their second bye is in Week 8 before taking on division rival Tulsa. They got 3 straight home games down the stretch. In fact, 4 games in a row down the stretch against playoff teams from last season, but at least they get most of them at home. Alamo City, D.C., San Diego. They finish up at West Division Central Division, rather, Team Denver in Week 14. Your thoughts on Tulsa?
Yeah, Tulsa's kind of always been that enigma type franchise, right, Cam? Whether they're up one year, down one year, they look like they're gonna, take a step forward. Then they end up taking a couple of steps back. But it's going to be interesting to see them this season. Can they again? Because it's always up and down. They were down last season. They probably end up taking a step forward this season. That's kind of the way the Desperados have been season in and season out. But their schedule definitely looks a little bit favorable. Kind of tough move, with moving in with Arizona and Denver joining that division, and that division is going to be tough anyway. With Indianapolis and Minnesota being a part of that. If I'm calling, Minnesota's there. So it's going to be one of those seasons again for Tulsa to see if they can prove themselves and be on the upside this time around.
Signings start tomorrow. We got a long day here at SFL headquarters. I will be on site for when the re-signing period opens up at, I believe it's 10 a.m. Eastern, if I have that right. And then at 6 p.m. Eastern, free agent frenzy starts. I will be back here, at SFL headquarters to bring on some guests, see what's going on as the signings roll through, as we get teams and players geared up and ready for season 22. One more thing before we go. I did compile this pretty number. We're going to put it over our faces because no one wants to see that anymore. But look at that. It's all on one graphic. There is your season 22 schedule. Every single team's when they play, what time they play, where their buys are, home and away, all that good stuff. And we'll post that in the Discord server. So that's a look at all 25 teams in the SFL, and glad we got to put that together. More analysis on the schedule coming to simulationfl.net in the coming days. We're going to talk about after free agency, some of the best matchups on the schedule post free agency, right? We're going to talk about the most interesting matchups once all the rookies are drafted. And we're going to have full analysis on tonight's show and some of the oddities of each team's schedule and a bullet point rundown of that. All right, Mike, your final thoughts before we wrap things up here tonight on the schedule release show for season 22, and we look forward to signings tomorrow.
Well, sports signings tomorrow. Hey, hunting season is open. The headhunters are still looking to hear from you. Rookies, free agents, get in contact with us. Hey, man, hunting season is open, and we're looking forward to next season. But overall, Cam, it's been great to be back with you again for the 6th season of the schedule release show, and looking forward to next summer where we can do it all again for 7 seasons in a row.
Sounds great, Mike. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow for re-signings, free agent frenzy, and so much more. SFLM second-round playoffs are on Monday, and if I don't speak to you specifically before the holidays, have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that coming up here in just 16 days. So have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here, and let's get this party started in just 34 days. Coming up, season 22. Good night, everybody.